Welcome to The Beat. We're tracking this breaking news. President Trump losing on immigration again today. This is even after the Supreme Court recently intervened, trying to help him fend off lower courts that pause his orders when they are deemed through the process likely illegal. But that's back where the administration finds itself again tonight, because the news is a rebuke from a federal judge hammering Trump with another national block of what has been this flailing effort to try to rewrite citizenship. The ruling freezes the White House. There are new details while that's going on that we're getting about that DOJ whistleblower case, which was against Trump's Justice Department and refers as well to the embattled and allegedly at times unlawful immigration agenda of this administration. There are now damning messages coming out that reveal the real-time texts about a top official's directive to defy court orders, being ready to say F you to the judges. All of this bolsters those initial reports, which shook the DOJ and Washington when they first broke.
Emil Bovee, a former Trump personal lawyer, now top aide to the Deputy Attorney General, pushed DOJ officials to ignore court orders.
Bovee stated that DOJ would need to consider telling the courts F you and ignore any such order. Silence overtook the room.
Erez Ruvani filed a whistleblower complaint against the Department of Justice. He says, I didn't sign up to lie. In response to his termination,
that official, Mr. Bovee, once did Trump's criminal defense work. He's up for this judgeship, and he did fend off the same accusations in his testimony. That whistleblower, though, is telling the New York Times today that Bovee's testimony didn't clearly or firmly deny all of this. And now we have the receipts, which show other people at the time heard the same thing, because multiple officials were texting each other how Bovee talked up telling the courts F you, which of course means in this term that they wanted to defy the courts, the DOJ, breaking the law rather than upholding it. Another DOJ lawyer writes in a text, I guess we're going to say F you to the court. And the response was a sarcastic super. Then you can see there the two discussing how Pam Bondi, the AG, would ultimately be responsible. The point is that these other lawyers who are inside the Trump administration, who had been deemed loyal enough to be senior enough to handle this immigration case, were aware of this plot, telling judges F you, defying orders. This is a Watergate level of evidence. Texting privately about it then. This was before that lawyer, the now whistleblower, was fired or moved on into this position. So again, from a legal perspective, that makes the evidence more credible. DOJ responds to this. They're denying it today. They're saying no one was ever asked to defy a court order. You'll notice saying that no one was asked to explicitly defy a court order is different than denying that Mr. Bovee did tell potentially a bunch of people that they would say F you to the courts, or that that was one of the potential plots. And we're early in this 4-year term. The DOJ is responding because it has to, because ignoring this isn't going to work right now, because facts, evidence, whistleblowers can still matter, because the receipts and the public reporting is putting heat on them for betraying the Justice Department itself at a time when they are tonight losing in the courts. While the same DOJ, on a very different issue, is taking heat from the MAGA conspiracy crowd for hyping and then failing to deliver on what Pam Bondi said in public was a Jeffrey Epstein client list that she claimed was sitting on her desk. Either she was terribly misinformed or she was actively lying, because now she runs the same DOJ that says there's no such list. MAGA leaders are calling for AG Bondi to go. Tucker Carlson and others basically saying she might have to be the first person sacrificed in this second term. That's a major storm on several fronts, plus those court losses for an attorney general early in her term and in the crux of everything Trump's trying to do on these issues. We're joined by two regulars our MSNBC viewers know, Jason Johnson, Melissa Murray. Melissa, your thoughts on these stories, which are pretty intersecting, the court loss today and whistleblower accounts of this immigration agenda?
Well, the court loss isn't surprising. The text of the 14th Amendment is plain, and the Supreme Court, even as it narrowed the eligibility for nationwide injunctions, did say that class actions would be a suitable vehicle. The administration has said that it will challenge the class certification procedures that Judge LaPlante used here. So I think we can expect this to go back to the court. But this all intersects, as you say, with what's happening at DOJ, because again, we see that the DOJ is very much advancing the project of this administration. The idea of the DOJ as a separate and independent institution, separate from the office of the president, seems to be no more the case. This is very much Donald Trump's DOJ. There isn't independence. And because there is no independence, it's very clear that this administration and the DOJ is going to be advancing the president's agenda. And that means appealing this decision from Judge LaPlante. It means going after Erez Ravuni because he has been a whistleblower and has sounded the alarm on what is happening at DOJ. And it also shows that the interaction between DOJ and other relevant departments like DHS is really riven right now. There's a breakdown in communication. There's a breakdown in coherence on these policies as DOJ strives to do what this president wants.
Jason, it's been a bad week for Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Yeah, it has. And, but the reality is this should have been expected, right? Like the moment that the court said this sort of, we're going to change the criteria, we knew that every ACLU immigrant organization, they were all going to squabble up. We knew that they were going to engage in this sort of pushback in order to stop this end of birthright citizenship. So, Pam Bondi should have expected that. The DOJ should have expected that. Situation with Beauvais is a little different. The idea that, look, we've seen the Trump administration consistently ignore court rulings. And let's remember that in this sort of big, ridiculous bill they just passed, there were actually stipulations in that bill to make it harder, right, to take away funding from courts to enforce if individuals don't listen after a court ruling has happened. So to have this come out, that you have somebody on the record saying, we're just going to ignore the courts. And Ari, this is important, an important distinction. It's one thing for a member of the Department of Justice to say, we're going to appeal this ruling. We're going to fight this ruling as much as we can. That is completely different than saying, F the law, right? And so this is another reflection of sort of how off base this administration is from the law, from values, from anything that we've expected before. And as to whether or not Pam Bondi couldn't figure out where the Epstein list was, that's something for the conspiracy theorists, because I never assumed that they were going to release that no matter how much Trump talked about it last year.
Right, and they may have talked about it for other reasons, hype, politics. In her case, though, coming into office, she's either was terribly misinformed, which is its own kind of malpractice, or she was lying. She just thought you go on Fox and you lie about this stuff. Her people, if you will, the people who are sort of, pardon me, in the MAGA crowd are the ones most upset. So they're under all of that pressure. I know Professor Murray has previously quoted Not Like Us on this broadcast, so she may have heard your Kendrick Squabble Up reference, which was artful. Professor, I want to play for you Justice Jackson, who's been in a bit more of a public written clash with Barrett on this high court as they are tested in this second term, saying this.
I would say the state of our democracy. I would say that I am really very interested in getting people to focus and to invest and to pay attention to what is happening in our country and in our government.
Judges are supposed to speak in a nonpartisan, careful way, which she does. But the reference there, Professor, was that she has concerns about our democracy right now that keep her up at night. That's not exactly a clean book of health for the current administration.
It's not a clean bill of health for the current
No, it's
administration.
not.
It's also not a clean bill of
Oh,
health.
sorry. We'll go
for her
Professor
colleagues.
first. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Jason. This is not a
Well,
clean
there are
bill
two
of health
professors.
either.
Professor
You have
Murray,
two
that's
professors.
my bad. My bad.
She is not just castigating the administration, she's also castigating her colleagues. I mean, the call is coming from inside the House. She says that in one decision that the Supreme Court is basically donning its emergency responder gear and not dousing the flames, but actually fanning them, exacerbating them by casting a different net on some of these rules, taking a lower standard for the administration, and essentially putting a thumb on the scale. That's, I think, really important to understand here, especially in light of what's been going on in DOJ. Those allegations by the whistleblower came out because Emil Beauvais, who had previously been one of the individuals to represent Donald Trump in his New York hush money case, who's now at the DOJ, has been nominated to the Third Circuit. So this is an appellate court that is likely to receive a lot of the challenges that are coming from lower court judges. And essentially, the charges that have been leveled against him in those text messages probably would scuttle a nomination in ordinary times. If these aren't
Oh, yeah.
ordinary times, it's very likely he's going to be confirmed to the Third Circuit, where he's going to sit and likely be someone who receives warmly whatever this administration puts forward. So Justice Jackson is not just talking about the administration, but all of the institutions that are supposed to check the president, check Congress, and also check each other in the courts.
Yeah, I mean, you lay it all out there. Professor Johnson, I wanted to get you in on this, and it doesn't help distinguish you guys when you have the same title. So, I'm still getting the hang of this moderator thing, but go ahead, Professor Johnson.
It's interesting because we never want to run the risk of sort of over personalizing things or falling into any sort of gender traps. But it's very clear from these last couple of rulings that Justice Barrett feels that she's being specifically called out by Justice Jackson. And many legal analysts have said, hey, when you write these sort of majority rulings, these are sorts of conflicts that can happen. But I think that Justice Jackson isn't just speaking as a Supreme Court justice when she's talking about this. She's talking also as an American citizen. She's not just talking as someone who's, look, I'm with 8 other people and we're supposed to be leading this country forward. She's saying, look, the failings of this body, the failings of this particular branch, whether it's Justice Barrett, whether it's any of these other justices, is having a negative effect on everyone else in this country and the ability of regular Americans to believe that their rights will be protected. So I think that what she's doing is very impressive because she's stepping off the bench and speaking to the people about the frustrations that she understands despite her high position.
Yeah, her high position, the care with which she chooses her words, but saying, hey, you're not imagining this. It's not a normal debate among justices about traditional activities. This is what we're living through, and what, if anything, is the citizenry going to do about it? I want to thank both our professors tonight, our leadoff guests. Thank you both. Coming up, we have one of those special reports we've been working on. This is about the power grab. I want to walk through documenting what's different about this second term, what you need to know. We also have a look down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theory mindset and why the internet and the MAGA movement have collided with a longer problem in American history. By the end of the hour, Nick Offerman is here with a new film that's timely. This will be his Beat debut later tonight. Turning to our special report now about how President Trump's second term is different than his first. We're over 170 days in, and there's an array of evidence that Trump is pushing to undercut the functional independence and checks in our government to get more power for himself. Now, that's not a policy or ideological issue. It's not just something between the parties. It actually tries to reshape our democracy and using actions that have long been opposed across the political spectrum. I know we live in divided times, but just consider that sending federal troops into American streets is exactly the kind of big government overreach that conservatives have long said they oppose, big government being something they say is a liberal problem. Or the heavy tactics of these masked federal agents raiding homes and workplaces instead of the local policing and states' rights, which conservatives claim to support. Trump is using executive powers to also retaliate against educators, against free speech, colleges, law firms, only because he disagrees with how they speak. Again, a crackdown that uses or abuses, some courts say, government power in a way that libertarians have long opposed. And they're the police tactics, specifically deployed against his critics or Democratic officials and protesters. Trump also is testing whether he can get away with asserting the power to ignore or even outright cancel certain federal laws, which undercuts the rule of law, quite literally, and the purpose of laws that Republicans and Democrats have previously passed through their elected power in Congress. Now, Trump may have wanted some of these outcomes in his first term, but he actually rarely got them like this. So if it's felt different lately, if you've said, wait, this is kind of even different in the first term, that feeling connects to the facts of what we're living with. So, what's changed? Well, a big shift is actually inside the government. In the first term, Trump oversaw an array of public servants who really did view him as an aberration. He was this first-time politician with a narrow mandate. He got fewer total votes than the opponent. He won through the Electoral College. You may remember it was a surprise to a lot of people. And those individuals viewed him that way, and they were, many of them, committed to holding the line on law, on the Constitution, on federal powers, the stuff I just mentioned. And when Trump would push to defy clear laws, I'm not talking about politics or policy, but clear lines, things in the Constitution, those checks and balances, a lot of those people inside the government would try to hold the line. That included military and security officials, people he personally appointed, as well as those in the bureaucracy. Many headlines about this. Individuals who, even at risk, stepped up, stopped, or revised Trump's plans, or sometimes said, if this is your goal, Mr. President, we have to find a way to do it constitutionally. If you remember all the way back to that Mueller probe, they found crimes by people in Trump's orbit. But remember, Mueller did not say he had a clear crime that he found by Donald Trump, and that's partly because of the people in the way, Trump's White House lawyer, McGahn, and others. We have the documented evidence from them, their own testimony, how they stopped Trump's schemes to obstruct justice, which can be a crime, or try to get Mueller fired, which would have been a big deal. He wanted to do that thing that was probably unconstitutional. They stopped him. So in a way, Trump's most unlawful instincts were stemmed. And that's why we have this system of government, by the way. That's why even powerful positions have these checks. Some of them are internal. Some of them are the lawyers in the room. And in a way, it protected Trump in the first term. He didn't have a lot of domestic achievements within the traditional job of being president, but he also was kept by those adults in the room from doing the type of things that have become pretty common in these first 170 days of the second term. Indeed, if you remember that New York Times piece by an official who sort of said there was a resistance inside the Trump administration just to keep him from the worst stuff. In fact, we checked. That very official who wrote about those guardrails now says in the second term, the people who played those roles are gone. And remember, I know we live in this partisan times, and if you talk to certain people, they'll try to make everything partisan. Oh, this means you're not MAGA, or you're against MAGA, or you love MAGA. I'm not even talking about MAGA politics. A lot of the people we're just referring to there were conservative, very politically MAGA individuals, Republicans all, and they stopped at breaking laws or bids to end democracy or kneecap the Justice Department, the type of stuff in the news tonight, while agreeing with Trump's platform and the Republican Party's plans otherwise. Now, that same first-term vet I just mentioned, who wrote in the Times, Miles Taylor, he explains what has changed is how Trump has completely figured out how to purge those people.
The so-called axis of adults was real, and there was a pretty strong cabinet and contingent who would push back against bad ideas. But look, he's got an ear for that. He knows who the people are that say no, and the president quickly identified those folks, and then you saw a very steady purge happen over the course of 2 years, and he's largely gotten rid of those folks.
True. He's gotten rid of them, and coming in with round two, he's very clear about who he's not going to deal with, who he will still purge, even in the lower levels. He got rid of the inspectors general, which is a relatively obscure watchdog group, but he got rid of a bunch of them in an unusual way. So there's none of those guardrails internally, and the rule of law itself is now, according to many experts, quite clearly under siege. We're at an early point in the term. People have noticed. People are fighting back.
The president of the United States is not king.
What we're seeing is this administration continue to run afoul of the law.
This is against the Constitution.
A king unbound by laws who rules by decree.
It's going against our rights as people and especially as American citizens.
What's it going to take for us to wake up?
The American people bow to no king.
Is it going to be too late? Is it going to be when the president has accreted all this power and the Congress is an afterthought?
And the Congress is an afterthought. Well, Republicans have been pretty partisan for a while in D.C., but they've hit a new level in Trump's second term. The GOP's congressional leaders are now both from this Trump era, different than the first term. They oversee a caucus that bends to Trump, and if there are any holdouts, you've seen the game, they still get Trump to the votes he needs. Now, back in the day, first term, you had the late John McCain risking a lot when he gave that memorable thumbs down on the Senate floor to save Obamacare.
All we've managed to do is make more popular a policy that wasn't very popular when we started trying to get rid of it. I will not vote for this bill as it is today.
Mr. Peters,
The Senate failed totally to pass a skinny version of the Obamacare repeal bill.
The maverick made his mark.
The president at this point probably has limited ability to sway someone like John McCain.
That was the first term. Trump saw it was hard to legislate, and he just turned away from it, and he's never come back. Indeed, he's not been involved in most domestic legislation this year, only turning to the budget because it's required. It's not something the government can skip. They have to pass that budget to fund the government. But everything else, immigration, political retribution, these diversity clashes in the second term, Trump doesn't send bills to Congress on those topics. That would take work. It would take some collaboration with lawmakers, even if they're Republicans. No, Trump is pursuing these goals first through the power grab of these White House orders. And some are so lawless, they keep getting smacked down. That was a top story tonight. This flood of executive orders leading to a loss, right? Because you can't just rewrite what's in the Constitution that defines citizenship. No president's ever had that power. But his current aides are not editing or limiting these orders, even if they're going to lose in court, as he lost again today with another national freeze. The effort is something larger, and that's what I want to make sure comes through tonight. They want more power in the White House for Trump. They want the president to have authority over every part of the federal government. That's the goal. It's in Project 2025, and these orders are part of that wider push.
Hours after becoming the 47th president, Donald Trump began signing dozens of executive orders.
Effectively press releases, right? The president saying, I want to do this, I'm taking action, I care.
We've just seen the signing of 9 or 10 executive actions.
But nothing might happen. And still others are probably lawsuit bait, really.
He rescinded Joe Biden's executive order lowering prescription drug prices for Americans on Medicare and Medicaid. Finally, someone's looking out for Big Pharma. Why so many orders? What is happening in this way that is changing the actual balance of government, and who's going to do anything about it? The conclusion of my special report after our shortest break. I'll be back with you in 90 seconds.
No one part can be more powerful than any other is. Each controls the other, you see, and that's what we call checks and balances.
Checks and balances. That's what's supposed to ensure no politician can take too much power, as Schoolhouse Rock there puts it. And you have different articles of government there, right? Different articles of powers in the Constitution. Trump never showed a lot of interest in that type of constitutional law detail during most of his career. But once in office, he discovered Article 2. That simply lists and limits the powers of the president. But Trump falsely argued that maybe it just gives him all the power.
Then I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president, but I don't even talk about that.
False. But Trump's second term shows a stronger push to take what he said there, a legally false claim, and make it a kind of test of whether the courts will give him powers that presidents didn't used to have. Trump appointees got the message. A story that's also in the news today, privately plotting about telling the courts, F you if we don't get what we want, according to a whistleblower. The current Trump resistance has noticed and wants to stop this would-be king, which shows millions of people, 5 million in one day of those protests, see the problem. And the backlash to the current second term is different than the first, focusing on these very issues. If the U.S. was just going to have one leader doing whatever he wants with no checks, we would not have needed a revolution to reject that kind of rule by kings. Americans literally fought a war for the freedom to empower people to oversee an accountable temporary rotation of governments rather than a single person being a king telling everyone else what was going to happen. Now, I can tell you in our daily news, from the front pages to TV programs, the headlines focus on what Trump's doing each day. So if he cracks down on campus free speech or tries to end diversity programs, we cover that. That's logical. People need the facts about those things. But my point tonight is, if you actually broaden out here, 170 days or so in, the way you could broaden out from a street map to viewing the whole planet, think about what Trump is actually doing through these powers, because the vast majority of the things we're covering on a daily basis in this second term are not laws or legislation. They're all from his effort to use these temporary, sometimes illegal orders to change our government as we know it, to flood the courts and country with whatever he signs. And he often does that without getting any review, policy or legal, without consulting with the experts inside even his own government, let alone Congress. And Trump is doing this at a level that's unprecedented in history. That's just a fact. And so if you're listening and saying, okay, Ari, like, you're just saying he's doing this and you're saying it's bad, but what if it were different policies? Don't other presidents use orders? Let's get into it. Trump is trying to seize power with White House orders more than any president in history. Here are the examples. You can see it's not even close for the first 100 days compared to Reagan or Obama. More than Trump's own first term, which you'll notice was more in an Obama area of number, right? That's something where we talk so much about politics, but look at that. They used the orders similarly over the first 100 days of a term. Now he's gone completely bananas. And that's for all the reasons mentioned: the lack of guardrails, a huge shift in how power works, wanting to undercut Congress, even though his party controls it, grinding down the checks and powers that are fundamental to our democracy if they're anywhere outside of the White House. Other presidents also viewed legislation as part of their legacy, like the Obamacare mentioned earlier. Well, President Trump, now in this second term, has the worst record ever at this stage for comparing actual legislation, which is how you're supposed to work with Congress, to leaning only on these orders at the start of a term. I'm going to show you the presidents who've wielded, say, both executive powers and new laws in the early days, right? FDR was seen as a very productive leader, did about 80 laws to 90 orders in a very, very important time, pivotal period there, post-Depression 33, going into trying to create the New Deal. He balanced the powers. Obama faced a Republican Congress and leaned a bit more on orders there. He tripled orders to laws passed. Now, how about Trump? Is he quadrupling? Is he doing 5 times? If we actually look at facts rather than the political debates that sometimes turn into just a shouting match, I want to show you Trump has blown all precedent out of the water. He signed over 35 times as many orders as new laws, almost no major laws whatsoever, no new legislation, no indication he wants to work with Congress more in the upcoming year on any non-required, non-budget items. This is the shift, and it's hard to see on a daily basis, but I want to make sure this comes through. A lot of people who study government think this is an autocratic effort. Past presidents, of course, might have had an interest in cutting out Congress, but most follow the limits. We don't have a modern precedent of any president, for example, signing an order saying they can just unilaterally rewrite the Constitution. That's something you hear about in Russia, not America. That's one of the orders I've mentioned, but you can see he's flooding the zone. He's also getting hit with more losses than any recent president, partly for that reason. Hasty, broad, sometimes legally completely frivolous, embarrassing orders that then get trimmed or outright canceled in court. So day to day, we follow the orders. We talk about birthright citizenship or DEI or the law firms. But sometimes we have to broaden out. And what we're seeing methodically done is an effort to not only cut out Congress, browbeat the courts, but to change how presidents govern this country, less like a democracy and more like an order-wielding king if he gets away with it. That's our special report. Coming up, we look at these conspiracy theories, and as promised, by the end of the hour, Nick Offerman is here.
The international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
There's no limit sometimes, no bottom to conspiracy theories. That's an iconic moment from Dr. Strangelove, dealing with the conspiracy theories and paranoia of Cold War discourse. Well, here we are a long ways later, but the conspiracy mindset continues in American politics. They used to talk about that paranoid style, and that was before the internet supercharged so much. A big story for the President of the United States and his Attorney General this week is that they oversold a conspiracy theory about Jeffrey Epstein's client list and his suspicious death. And now it could be what, according to Tucker Carlson, should dislodge the Attorney General. That's how big a deal it is. Or Congresswoman MTG, pushing theories about controlling the weather which is something she says the government could do, and exploiting tragedy weeks to bring that up again. QAnon believers were overlapping with some of the Trump discourse in 2020. We saw them, and I'm not saying that's everyone at the rally, but you could see people saying, hey, we want to push our conspiracy, which had a lot of people interested in it, about QAnon and overlap with the political movement. Trump has trafficked in all kinds of misleading, false statements, sometimes lies, and sometimes what we call conspiracy theories, going after Obama in racial terms to peddle the idea that, again, conspiracy theories sometimes do some work, that they had to find new and more evidence in another birth certificate and another one just to reinforce what was already true, if you remember all that.
We're not going to be able to do it if we just make stuff up and pretend that facts are not facts. We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers. We do not have time for this kind of silliness. We got better stuff to do.
The president was speaking against Donald Trump's efforts there in 2011. Now, some people say, hey, if you can believe in horoscopes or you have your own religious views, what's wrong with people having outlandish ideas? And if you keep it to your conversational dialogue, yes, you have freedom of speech to talk about it. But let's be clear. A lot of this stuff goes beyond speech. After 9/11, we had a lot of conspiracies across the political spectrum about an inside job, something that not only upset many victims, but complicated the need to do actual democracy decisions about how to respond to this if people are terribly misinformed. In 1993, 80 people killed in Waco, Texas, because anti-government religious extremists fought off those agents, and there was a lot of misinformation during and after that. It inspired Timothy McVeigh to launch a domestic terror attack later on a federal building. When you have the false information, the conspiracy theories, the idea that the government is always the kind of the boogeyman behind something terrible, you can have real world results all the way up to now. In 2010, there were followers of something called Sovereign Citizen. It was a movement that shot and killed a police officer at a traffic stop, a true story that's inspired the new film Sovereign.
But at some point, you have to let them know that you won't be pushed any further.
This is an illegal stop.
Sir, get back in the car.
What law did I break?
Get back in the
Tell me
car
what
right
law I
now.
broke and I'll comply.
Sir? They're sick in the head. That's all. So we just gotta play their silly little games.
The man you saw there in the trailer, Nick Offerman, is in this dramatic role. It's already generating a lot of discussion. He's our special guest next.
It sounds to me like your dad doesn't like the government very much. I mean, I don't want to have to kill anybody. But if they keep messing with me, then I'm afraid that's what it's going to come down to. And if I have to kill one, I'm not going to be able to stop. I just know it.
That's from this new film, Sovereign, starring our next guest, Nick Offerman. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, sir.
Absolutely. Great to have you. So much to get into, but you look at this project, those of us who follow the news can see a lot of overlap. Of course, it's its own thing. What drew you to it?
It's a really beautifully crafted depiction of the victims of a lot of these conspiracy theories, sort of the victims in our country that are on the receiving end of these streams of misinformation. It always makes me think of the January 6th rioters. There are a lot of people that were told they were doing something good there, while they were committing violence against Capitol Police and against our government. And so the writer-director, Christian Swagel, has crafted this piece that also looks at the relationships between fathers and sons and the kind of masculinity that we want to instill in our young people. And I read the script and said, I think I got to do this, because instead of shaking my fist at, people who get this bad information, it gives me a more sympathetic view of them and say, oh, I understand if you lost your home to a mortgage scam, or you can't get health care, so you ended up getting kicked out of your house. Suddenly that becomes something I can empathize with and say, look, we're all the victims of these problems in our society. And I think it's just a beautiful piece of filmmaking by this guy, Christian Swagel.
I love the way you put that. I mean, look, the world is unfair. The world is complicated. It's only getting more complicated for a lot of people. And so, faced with those tough situations, people might jump on or sort of take solace in something um, for other reasons that's totally untrue. Do you look at this as a way to also, you mentioned understand these people, uh, to humanize people? Because in politics, we're being pulled farther apart. In art, sometimes we go, oh, wow, we have something in common.
Absolutely. I mean, I use that term frequently talking about this film is it humanizes. I once was invited to go sit with a bunch of people on death row at a prison as part of a program to do the same thing, where when you hear their stories and hear the reasons that they end up making the bad decisions that they make, you suddenly realize, wow, it's just a roll of the dice between me and them. That could happen to anybody. A lot of it is just bad luck or being dealt a bad hand of cards. And I think that our society needs to do a lot better job of taking care of the working class who lose their homes or lose their health care, and also have some degrees of mental illness. All of these need to be coddled and embraced more than, considered an enemy.
How does that work, though, when you do something like this? Are you in touch with your representatives, your creative community, and saying, I want to find a project like this for that reason? Or you put the word out, or you just look at a lot of stuff and this one just came together? Take us through that.
I mean, I've got a great agency called UTA, and the things that I get offered get filtered through them, and
Yep.
for whatever reason, it's funny. A lot of the roles I get offered, maybe shouldn't consider it a compliment, but I had the right attributes to play this particular sad, tragic crackpot, with a little bit of the gift of gab and a violent streak. So I have really great agents who say, "Hey, we think you should take a look at this independent
Well,
film
Nick,
script."
is that your vibe? Do you think your natural vibe is giving just a little bit of crackpot?
I mean, sure. I think there are a lot of colors on my paint palette, and I'm glad that I can bring a variety of characters to the screen. And frankly, being known primarily for a comedy show, I'm really glad that the audience allows me to flex my muscles and do something dramatic like this.
Yeah, and we as we showed folks in the setup, it's a really striking portrait of a very serious set of events that I think could interest a lot of people. So our viewers can decide if they want to check it out. It overlaps with some of the real world stuff we're dealing with. But you are known, I think it's fair to say, chiefly for the humor. We have one Parks and Rec moment. Is that all right with you?
Sure, I'm a fan.
All right, roll it.
Here I come, the government, and I get to take 40% of your lunch. And that, Lauren, is how taxes work.
That's not fair.
You're learning.
Did you have fun throughout? For fans, it looks like, I mean, there's the thing of, do you love the show? It's funny. And then there's shows like Parks and Rec. I think The Office is like this, where the fans imagine like you guys are just having a blast every day.
Yeah, the most important thing about that show is that it's made by people with a good heart. It runs through the storylines, that it suggests optimism. The humor is derived by the train wreck that small town bureaucracy can be, and those of us that butt heads with different ideologies. But at the end of the day, we can be critical of government, but we are also nonviolent, and we understand that we can
Sure.
still be good people. I still want to share your sandwich, even if we didn't vote for the same person.
I mean, isn't that what it all comes down to? Can we just share a sandwich? My final question is, uh, have you always had this distinctive voice? It seems like you could say almost anything and it would sound cooler in your voice. I'm sure you have some awareness of that as a presenter that you are.
You know, it's funny. I grew up in the Catholic Church at St. Mary's, and I was an altar boy. And then at some point, they had me start doing the gospel readings. So I guess Father Tony was the first to discover me, and I don't know. It's funny. I just sound kind of like my dad, I think, and so I'm glad that people enjoy it and that it conveys a certain tone. And I hope I'll get to keep doing so.
It has, in my ear, it has a gravity without any pomp. It's like right at that level of seriousness, but it's not like pretentious. That's how I hear it.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm always learning, but I do love storytelling. I mean, I've always loved reading books to kids and adults. I do a lot of audiobooks.
Right.
And I wanted to say, you know, before I lose you, that there's a young man named Jacob Tremblay who plays my son in this movie, and then a slightly less young man named Dennis Quaid, and then a third guy named Thomas Mann, and they all turn in these incredible performances. Because we can talk about the sort of the themes of this film, but it's really the work these guys turn in, the performances they give, that I think will really compel an audience to tell each other to see it.
Yeah. Well, shout out to them and Father Tony. And I'll remind folks with Nick Offerman here signing off. Thanks for being here. We'll put back up. Sovereign is in theaters and streaming tomorrow. Check it out. We'll be right back. We were just talking about conspiracy theories. Do you think the internet's making them worse? You can tell me at Ari Melber on social media, the internet, if you use any of those platforms, or go to arimelber.com to connect with me directly. Thanks as always for watching The Beat.